Please call the roll.
Alderman Nguyen.
Here.
Alderman Wilson.
Here.
Alderman Holmes.
Here.
Alderman Tendem.
Here.
Alderman Grover.
Here.
Alderman Rainey.
Here.
Alderman Burris. Alderman Fisk.
Here.
Alderman Jean-Baptiste.
Here.
9-0.
We have a quorum. I, Elizabeth B. Tisdall, Mayor of the City of Evanston, pursuant to Council Rule 16.3, call for a special meeting of the Evanston City Council on Monday, September 20th, 2010 at 6 p.m. in the City Council chambers at the Evanston Civic Center, 2100 Ridge Avenue, for the purpose set forth below. Goal-setting workshop, fiscal year 2010-11 mid-year financial review, revenue and expenditure update, CIP update, CY 2011 budget preview, revenue and expenditure estimates, revenue enhancement, budget and debt policy, and executive session. City Manager, the first item is a goal-setting workshop.
Yes, Madam Mayor, members of the council, good evening. I have a brief PowerPoint presentation to walk through where we stand with our goals for the year 2010. As the council will recall, last September, almost exactly at this date, I believe it was the 17th of September last year, the council went through a goal-setting workshop and selected 12 goals. We'd like to review those goals with you and ask you to reflect on them and decide, do these goals still match the needs of the council and the community for 2011, or if there are adjustments that you'd like to make. So I'd like to walk through what the 12 goals are in alphabetical order: affordable housing, budget planning, capital improvement program planning, and if you recall, a few of these you added a subline to, and in this case, streets and alleys, the climate action plan, economic development, and a subhead here, neighborhood revitalization and water sales issues, efficiency and effectiveness of services, transparency, federal, state, and regional government affairs, Lakefront Development, Northwestern University, police and fire pension funding issues, the Robert Crown Center improvements, and safety issues. The first council goal, affordable housing, as you all know, a lot of work has been done this year with that, really focused around the receipt of a grant, Neighborhood Stabilization Program 2 housing grant. Our staff has been very focused on moving that forward with 100 units of housing included in that grant. We continue to work with the city's 5 CHODOs, Community Housing Development Organizations, leveraging the funding from our CDBG Housing Rehabilitation Program, working on housing and rehabilitation and foreclosures. You've been getting a regular report on foreclosures. And then also a reorganization of our housing staff with a new hire for the focus specifically on the NSP2 housing grant, the reallocation of Sarah Flax to include affordable housing and her responsibilities, and we have hired a new housing planner who will start with us next week to replace a vacancy there. So I think we've made some good progress in the area of affordable housing. The second council goal, budget planning, a lot of work has been done there as well. We are beginning this evening a transition to a calendar year budget. We anticipate getting the council the budget, proposed budget on October the 8th, and a series of scheduled meetings be done by the end of November so that the council will be able to make any adjustments or have the flexibility to make adjustments in the property tax if you so choose prior to the December 15th deadline so that that adjustment would be reflected in the calendar year budget. We have consolidated the budget preparation schedule. Really, this is the second budget preparation process in the last 12 months, so certainly you're all familiar with the extensive public outreach we did for the budget that began on March 1. We have consolidated that down to 2 meetings. As we are doing that this year, we had the first meeting last week, and the next community meeting is on the 29th of September. We have also been able to get the attention of the University of Illinois at Chicago and a group of their MPA students. They are working on a capstone budget project. It is our hope that we would get some ideas from this project for fiscal year 2012. So they are working now, monitoring the process that we're using in 2011, and will be coming back to us at the end of the calendar year with their class project, which will be to offer recommendations to us for a new budget document that we would unveil with the next 12-month budget process in 2012. The document that we've been using has been much pared back, but I also fear that it's lost some meaning as far as performance measurement, as far as sub-goal setting in the various departments. So we've asked the team of students at the University of Illinois at Chicago and their MPA program to take this on, so there's a group of students working on that. We hope to have their recommendations to you hopefully later in the winter for fiscal 2012. And then budget transparency, that's really been a hallmark of everything that we've done with last year's budget process, with the budget process we're now beginning for next year, using the web, using Channel 16, using these meetings to make sure that the community is aware of what we're doing with our budget. In the area of capital improvement planning, again, really the hallmark there from my perspective is increased city council involvement. We've had several meetings for the current year to look at what we're spending our money on, how we're spending our money. I think we've made some progress there, but we want to improve that. We have improved our CIP reporting methods. I think have improved informing the council the various funding options. Certainly tonight, a part of the agenda later this evening is going to be to talk about the city's debt policy. In my opinion, we have too much debt, and much of that is capital debt. And how do we manage the needs of the community from capital improvements with available funding sources? We've also streamlined the CIP planning and development process internally, so I hope that it makes a little bit more sense. This evening you'll be getting your first new version of a quarterly report on our various CIP projects, and we hope that that's informative for the council as you move forward with your review of current projects and also as you think about developing projects in the future. The next area is the Climate Action Plan, and certainly with the departure of Carolyn Colopy, our Sustainability Programs Coordinator, she's done a lot in the time that she was with us. We have the position closed last Friday. We received 84 applications for her position from around America, so people are very interested in helping us move forward with the implementation of the Climate Action Plan. Some highlights of the past year dealt with the approval of the multimodal transportation plan really at the beginning of that year in 2009 as we move forward to have a policy for the use of green fleet, and the council approved just at your last meeting some additional vehicles, and we hold all those future vehicle purchases up against a policy that the council has agreed to regarding the green fleet. We are continuing to look at car sharing programs, certainly encouraging those in the private sector that are here in Evanston, but also looking how we in the city government can better share programs. Traffic signal coordination as a part of the Climate Action Plan, but also certainly we're doing a lot with the signals and the street lights to make sure that they're more energy efficient. We're working through Matt Swinkowski, our Intergovernmental Relations Coordinator, more closely with PACE and the CTA and the RTA to look at transit options. As many of you know, we are a host site this Wednesday for the Chicagoland Car Free Day and have events scheduled at the Davis Street stations early on Wednesday morning, so we continue to be focused on that. The point that's listed on the screen here is the beginnings of a work that PACE is doing on a rapid transit system to O'Hare. We've talked a lot about north-south transit opportunities, but this may be one of the only east-west opportunities we have moving forward, so we're excited to be working in a concerted way there. The ComEd Community Energy Challenge was a big part of our last year, getting community citywide really interested in that. We did not win, but I think had made a lot of energy and effort to bring down our use of greenhouse gases. Ms. Colopy was here a month or two ago with a complete report on that. The City Council adopted a citywide green building ordinance, and Fire Station station number 5, which was completed, was the first LEED Gold fire station in the state of Illinois. So,
City Manager, I would suggest we might want to add to the list our work to get the Purple Line rehabbed and also to replace the viaducts.
Absolutely, because our rapid transit really is a hallmark to our reducing greenhouse gases, and certainly our more active engagement of the CTA, RTA, Metra is a big part of that.
Alderman Rainey?
And let's not forget all the planning that's gone into a stop on the yellow line.
Absolutely.
I think that shows that not only is this an important part of what we do as a community, but I think we're making a lot of good progress. And much of this is funded by others, and that's the other key point. A lot of the things that we're doing, we are funding ourselves, but a lot of these initiatives are funded by others. Today, we released the 2009 report on the Climate Action Plan, so all of that good work is contained in that document. Next, in the area of economic development, while we're going through these on an alphabetical level this evening, clearly a year ago when the council met, economic development was the #1 item on the council's goals. I think I've made a lot of strides focusing on our business districts, not only for funding but for organization. Some of them are more well organized as others. We're working with a group on Howard Street, for example, to create a business association, but we are supporting those associations around Evanston in a variety of different ways. I think first and foremost we're focusing on business retention, and the work that our economic development team is doing is really focused on that business retention. We're hoping now to spend a little bit more energy and effort on business expansion. I mean, just looking in downtown Evanston over the last several weeks, the number of new businesses that have opened in downtown Evanston, and we're seeing that kind of renewed interest around Evanston and the various retail shopping areas, so we're focused on that. The other piece of this is not just retail, but also what other kind of businesses can we develop here, and working closely with Northwestern University, I think we've made great strides this year on engaging their faculty members who are busy at work creating companies to make sure that those companies stay in Evanston. They bring good paying jobs to the community. They like to be here in Evanston. The people who are working in the biosciences, on the tech side, on some of the more direct-to-consumer businesses that we have in Evanston, they like to be here, and we need to continue to support that. The work of our TIFs, I think that's something we'll be talking much more about over the next several months, is how best to leverage our TIF districts in ways perhaps we have not done before. And then finally, looking at areas of signage. There's a initiative going forward right now regarding the West Evanston Master Plan to incorporate some of the suggestions there, but we're looking at that citywide. So by and large, I think we're doing great work there. Lehman Walker, in his time here as the Community and Economic Development Director, I think set us on a very good course, and as we look to fill that position, I think there's lots of positive things happening in this area. Another subcategory of economic development when the council set its goals was in the issue of water sales, and the feeling of the council that a way for us to make more money to support general fund operations would be to be more aggressive in marketing the water that we treat here in Evanston to other area communities. That's really happening in two areas. One is working with our partners at the Northwest Water Commission. We are talking to them about the opportunity for running a second line from here to their treatment facility in Des Plaines. We're also talking with them about opportunities within their existing infrastructure to take on additional customers that they would serve, and that we would then supply water to them that would basically grow their commission from the 4 communities that currently make it up to additional communities. A second area is working with communities that are surrounding the village of Skokie, because we currently sell water to the village of Skokie. There are opportunities through interconnection with those area communities for us to sell water to those communities adjacent to Skokie, but to get it to them through the village of Skokie. And we are working with their engineering staff right now on ascertaining how best to do that through their existing system, and talking with those neighboring communities. So my sense is that we will see some movement here over the next 6-9 months, likely through the Northwest Water Commission, but we'll continue to move with the communities around the village of Skokie, so that when those communities are ready to move forward, that we will have the ability to deliver the water, hopefully in a very efficient and effective manner. Speaking of efficiency and effectiveness, that was the next council's goal. A lot of work has been done in this area in the last year with how we deliver municipal services. A big piece of this has been the city departmental reorganizations that occurred with the budget on March 1st, the creation of a community and economic development department to focus our economic development efforts at a higher level within that organization, the consolidation of our human resources, finance, information technology, and parking operations into a Department of Administrative Services, spinning off our utilities division as a department from the Department of Public Works to allow them to focus more not only on the water issues we've just talked about, but also on the larger issues we have with utilities, electric, gas, and cable television. A big part of how we deliver services and how people get information from us is electronically, and I think the new website that we launched this summer is especially helpful with that. People still call us, and I think for a long time there's been a lot of frustration reaching us through our general number that is staffed through our front desk, as well as the staff at our police department front desk. We've used technology to improve the phone systems at both locations to make it easier for people to get through. Generally speaking, we've been getting a lot of positive comments from residents that it's easier to get through, but really that leads us all up to probably the largest initiative we're looking at in the coming year, and that is the launch of a 311 call center. Work has been going on that for many months. Joe McCrae, who is leading that effort, will be before the council next Monday evening to give you a complete update on where we stand with that. Our plan still is to go live on March 1st, 2011, or 3111. We're very excited about that. We're also excited that we're going to be able to bring this new service to the residents of Evanston without asking for significant additional resources. We are going to be able to take staff members from different parts of the organization and basically look at the work that's being done at various locations throughout the city and shift that work off to the 311 center and freeing up positions for other uses. And so that will be coming to you as part of the budget process. We also feel, as far as efficiency and effectiveness, there's the issue of transparency. And we are creating on our website a new section specifically devoted to transparency, where people will be able to find information about all contracts that the city let. They'll be able to find out detailed information regarding what we pay our employees, information about executive sessions, information about other things, all in one location. So that when people are looking to see how we're spending our money, how we're doing our business in a probably a finer way than a general look on our website will provide, that new transparency website will help that. And then finally, as Mr. McCrae will detail next week, we're getting ready to move forward with a mass notification system to launch on November 1st. Again, this is something we are not going to be asking the council for additional resources for. There is a grant that the health department receives on an annual basis, and we believe, we know that the funding for this mass notification system will be able to be grant funded for the foreseeable future. So this will allow us to reach out to residents for police activity, for broken water main. Anytime we would need to reach out to our residents, we'd be able to do that through a recorded phone call. But in addition to that, residents would also be able to register cell numbers to receive either phone messages or text messages, email addresses to receive emails, so that when there is something that we want to reach out to people on a geographic basis, people aren't always home, that we can reach them in other ways as well. So they're looking to move forward with the launch of that on November the 1st. Federal, state, and regional government relations, another council goal, and we've done, again, I think a good job this past year focusing our efforts. Most of that focus is through our intergovernmental relations coordinator, who was hired several months ago. Mayor Tisdale and I have been both to Springfield and Washington on a couple different occasions to lobby first for the NSP2 grant successfully and for other issues of importance to the city of Evanston. The Evanston Day in Springfield this past spring, I think, was very successful in bringing together not only our education partners but other nonprofits and other community leaders to share with our representatives in Springfield what we're all about. And then the other piece that we've not really spent much time on at all before is the regional activities, working with the CTA, the RTA, METRA, the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning, and I think we've made some good first progress there. We've talked about the Purple Line Viaduct improvements, also working with METRA on other improvements there, and working regionally and collaboratively with not only CMAP but the Northwest Municipal Conference, probably in ways we've not in the recent past, with our neighbors around the Chicago area, Northern Illinois, on issues that are important for all of us. Again, the Purple Line Viaducts and the federal grants that we have out right now, the Tiger II, the HUD Sustainable Communities Grant, which Congresswoman Chakowski joined us a couple of weeks ago to discuss, and some grant opportunities from the EPA. Lakefront Development, the council has talked about this goal on a couple of different occasions, primarily focusing on the Lakefront Master Plan. The direction to the council at this point has been to continue to focus on the plan as resources allow, and that is what we will continue to do unless given another direction. Relationship with Northwestern University on lots of different levels, in addition to the fire engine, which is arriving this week and will be out and about at various activities associated with our Paint Evanston Purple events at the end of the week. So that fire engine will be here and put into service soon. We are working, continue to work with them on increased dialogue on student neighbor issues. I think we've made some good progress there, but there's still lots of work to be done. Northwestern was a partner with us in the Evanston Day in Springfield. As an outgrowth of the work we're doing this weekend came an opportunity to bring additional students from the Evanston community to the Northwestern campus, and we are working with the Evanston Library, Evanston Township High School, and Northwestern on some opportunities there for later in the fall and early winter. The economic development partnerships, which I've already talked about, and we've also worked closely with them to increase the number of opportunities for Evanston youth to participate in youth sports camps this past summer that are put on by the coaches of the various sports. Over 90 Evanston youth participated on scholarship in various summer youth sports camps. Police and fire pension funding, again, I think the council is pretty familiar with the issues here. A long discussion at your last meeting. We are active as a member of the Fair Pension Coalition and with the Northwest Municipal Conference on participating on a statewide lobbying effort on these issues. The council reduced the interest rate assumption that will help increase funding to both funds, and we continue to work to hold the line on current police and fire costs, which help us down the line with pension funding. Next is the Robert Crown Center improvements. An RFQ was issued, 8 proposals were received. The council subcommittee that was formed reviewed those proposals and selected 4 proposals to select for further consideration. The review of those RFQs is beginning later this month and into early October, and it's our plan to come back to the City Council with a recommendation on next steps in November. The area of safety issues that the council recalls, this is a pretty large goal that the council set, dealing with school safety, pedestrian safety, youth safety in general, the cell phone ban and the adjustments in the school zone fines came from, in part, this particular goal. As of, I think, a month or so ago, we had given out 752 cell phone tickets and 48 crosswalk tickets near school zones. The restorative justice partnerships continue. We have worked a lot with a number of neighborhood groups regarding pedestrian safety. The 6th Ward, for example, is having a ward meeting coming up in the next week or so, and a lot of interest among neighborhood groups there to continue working with our public works staff on pedestrian safety issues, and we continue to partner with District 65 on safe routes to schools. So that's a quick overview of the council's 12 goals that were selected a year ago. Would ask that the council spend some time this evening reviewing those goals and deciding if those goals still make sense, if there are additions, deletions, changes you'd like to make. We will then take this input as we continue our work on the proposed budget and implement accordingly within the budget, and then provide you an update on goals implementation in about 6 months. Madam Mayor, members of the council, thank you for kind of a long presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Alderman Fisk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I was concerned last year when we were setting goals that the lakefront, the goal to discuss the lakefront had morphed into Lakefront Development, which we've been talking about, at least I have found that at various committee meetings and board meetings that I've attended, a lot of attention is being given to a very extraordinary and complicated and expensive plan for the lakefront, which I do not believe is consistent with the Lakefront Master Plan. So I would like us to be as clear as Wally was tonight in that goal is specifically to how best to implement the Lakefront Master Plan that was passed by the Evanston City Council, rather than reaching out to something that is more ambitious than that, for which I don't see that we will ever have the funding for. And I'm a little bit concerned about how much time is being taken up by various committees who are confused about that. And I would like the City Council to be a little bit more clear in defining the intention of that goal, rather than reaching out to massive development on the lakefront.
Alderman Rainey.
Well, what I have to say had nothing to do with that, and I don't want to
All right,
derail that conversation.
all right, Alderman Jean-Baptiste.
Yeah, I don't understand when we put forth a set of absolutes. I mean, you have a time certain. Is it for the next 100 years?
No.
Is it for the next 5? Is it, because there's a plan, there's a master plan that people debated, but it's not static, nor does it become a dogma. The reason why there may be proposals coming forth is because other residents of the city of Evanston, other citizens have different perspective, and they're putting forth the perspectives, and to the extent that the council has not approved those, to move them forward. I don't think you can silence anyone. Right now, the status quo is that it is the master plan as it is. But I don't think we can legislate, a sort of prohibition against individuals coming forth, putting forth proposal, and committees considering. If any committee votes to advance a different path, we've got to take that on in its concrete form. But I don't think you could legislate, a prohibition. It is what it is right now, and that's what we have until there is something else that we are considering. I know that at economic development, Mr. Vasilko did make a proposal. Majority of people, we talked about the proposal. There was no action. It was up for discussion. So it has not come up for action in the committee. And I think when it does, if it does, then we'll have to reiterate or open up the door. But right now, I don't think we can prohibit proposals coming forward to consider.
Alderman Grover.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My understanding is that underlying both the lakefront development goal and our lakefront master plan is the idea that we want to make our lakefront a magnet, that we want to maximize the use and enjoyment of our lakefront by all Evanston residents. And I don't think in that sense that lakefront development is incompatible with the lakefront master plan. I'd like to keep lakefront development on our list of priorities and goals for 2010, just for that reason, because I think our lakefront right now is underutilized, and we haven't done enough to get every resident to the lakefront to enjoy and use it. We have these lovely facilities now, and we got to reach further into the city to get residents to our lakefront.
Alderman Wilson?
And from my own perspective, in my mind, in working on these goals, to me, development means what we do there. It's not, to me, it didn't infer that we're going to develop or build something there. So that was my understanding, and I don't really have any, plans or anticipation of deviating from the master plan to any significant degree. So to me, that's all development means, is what can we develop to bring more people there, but not develop buildings or, other significant deviations from the plan.
Alderman Nguyen?
I don't want to belabor this issue, but I think that the word development does send a certain message to people, and we've always used that word when we've built large buildings and other big developments, the movie theater development. And I think perhaps to follow what the city manager has just described, which is that right now we are continuing as we are able to follow the Lakefront Master Plan, perhaps a better description instead of the word development, which I agree with Alderman Wilson with his viewpoint, but I think that the word means a lot to Evanstonians, and it doesn't mean, I think it's not quite in line with what Alderman Wilson just described. I think perhaps a better term would be lakefront improvement and enhancement, which I think is really what the goal of the master plan was. It was to improve what we have and enhance it so it becomes more attractive to all Evanstonians and allows people to come and use it as they would like to in a wide variety of ways. But it doesn't mean development, a symphony orchestra, an opera house, a marina. Okay.
Alderman Grover?
Or lakefront utilization to describe the goal.
Yeah,
It's
okay.
about the people.
That's fine. Yeah, because that covers not only what we might do there, but really how we can use it better. Sorry, I spoke out of turn there, Mayor.
That's all right. Alderman Jean-Baptiste?
Well, the master plan has laid out, what we will do. But I think that the intent here on the part of, Alderman Fisk and Alderman Nguyen, and I understand the objective, is to limit the vision of the possible usages. And so as Architect Facilco came forth with a proposal that was a departure from what the plan set forth, what I hear being discussed here is to prohibit that, is to not even think about it. And I'm saying that the lakefront, maximum utilization of the lakefront at this point in time as we define it is set forth in the plan. But that may be redefined down the road. And so I think that we have to not try to see if we could stamp out new ideas before they come forth or new directions, because ultimately how we make a determination is through a process. The proposals, we consider, we do discussion, we vote, we make determinations. Right now, we say we're following a particular plan, and that's what we're doing. So I don't see us redefining what it is that we say we are following. We said the goal is, lakefront development, and I don't see changing that to then try to say new ideas need not come forth. Because we've limited a bunch of stuff on the lakefront. We have X number of events and you can't do more. We have parking up to a certain time, okay? We have a bunch of limitations. And I recognize as well that we do utilize the lakefront significantly. But I think that the kind of tone that is being advanced saying we will have certain absolutes that we don't, certain folks need not come forth with ideas in a particular direction. I think we need to get away from that. This city is about, engagement on all levels. and the city council has voted to go in a particular direction, and until it does something differently, then we maintain the status quo.
Alderman Holmes?
I just wanted to say that I don't think that development means to all Evanstonians big buildings. Sometimes it does mean just enhancement and a different view in terms of how we're going to enhance the lakefront. So I would not like to see us box ourselves in. I certainly don't anticipate any huge buildings or anything like that, but I would like to see some enhancement.
Alderman Burris?
I wanted to concur with Alderman Jean-Baptiste. I think, as usual, you are very eloquent on this, and that we need to continue to have an open mind about the lakefront and be progressive versus stagnant. As I think, that Alderman Fisk, your comments are, we plan something, and this is how we're going to be, and we're always going to be this way. And I think that Alderman Jean-Baptiste, let's think about new things that come before us. We always don't have to look behind in the rearview mirror. There's a lot of things in front of us. So thank you very much for your comments.
Alderman Tandem?
Thank you. I also would agree with Alderman Jean-Baptiste. I think that putting any sort of framework or parameters on this kind of stymies the creative process. And what we need in this town is a thorough creative process. We have a limited time to use our lake. There are some activities that go year-round, but we have to work to sort of get as much use out of it in the days that are longer and warmer that we can. And I think we can do a lot in that respect with events and other, like drawing other people in. But I think it really needs to be an open-minded process with not anything blocking it at this point. Mr. Vilsoko's proposal has stirred a lot in my head. With all the number of things he's come up with, but even with regards to other parts of the city, I think those things are applicable. Thinking on that scale is not wrong. I think we can look at other parts of our city and places that could tolerate a lot of development for usage of in entertainment and all people of Evanston.
Alderman Wilson?
Not to be argumentative, but I think we're probably making more out of this than we need to. But to me, when we set these goals. These are things that need some sort of specific parameters. So I think at all times we are supposed to be and we should be open to any ideas that come up. But we tried to set some specific goals that the city staff can look at and take specific action on. So to generally say, okay, the lake is special, we're always open to everything, that's really not a goal. That's more of, I guess, a general policy. To me, my interpretation, generally speaking, was that this was to we have a goal of implementing the master plan, so what is the staff going to do to implement the plan that's already in place? So I would like to continue to track how we're implementing the plan, and to me that's the goal, and I think we should maybe change it from development, because that is apparently led to some confusion, to perhaps something like implementation of lakefront plan or something along those lines.
Alderman Nguyen?
Well, I concur with what Alderman Wilson just said, and I don't think that at any time the City Council has ever closed to new ideas, but I do think that and certainly someone like Mr. Vasilko, who spent enormous amounts of his own time and talent to present that plan to us, is welcome to do that at any time. But I do think what we are doing here by setting these goals is we're directing the staff and how we best think the topics that we best think they should put resources into. And so if Mr. Vasilko or anyone else wants to come in with a plan or ideas about how better ways to use Evanston and our resources, that's terrific. But I do think that development is a word that does trigger. It can trigger something very broadly, but my 13 years on the council, development meant somebody who came before the Plan Commission and built something. So, and I don't think that's what the Lakefront Master Plan process was all about. And I'd like to remind everyone that only took place 2 years ago. So this isn't a plan that we that was written 10 years ago. It was a plan that was written 2 years ago. So if I were someone who had participated in those 10 meetings over the course of 10 months, I would be really concerned about participating again in drafting something if the council so rapidly decides 2 years on on a plan that that was designed, the master plan is designed as a 20 or 30-year plan. And the reason why we wrote it is so that all of our various city departments can go out and get grants and funding for various aspects of the plan. I'm going on too long. I do agree with Alderman Wilson and Alderman Grover that another description here is, I think, would be more helpful to the citizens to describe what we are directing the staff to do. It doesn't bar anyone from coming forward, but it does help the staff understand and the citizens to understand that we're not tossing the master plan out the window. So I would move that we change lakefront development on this goal list to lakefront master plan implementation and utilization, and lakefront and utilization.
I would second that.
It's been moved and seconded. Can we take votes at special city council meetings? Where's my...
We would ask that the council deliberate on any changes, then we will bring back for action a revised list.
As long as you vote on items of the agenda,
You can vote. All right, well, it's on the agenda. All in favor?
Aye.
Do you want further discussion? Sorry, Lionel.
I'd like a roll call vote.
I mean,
And I can't hear you.
we're not finished discussing this yet. You know, I'm not prepared to change the...
Okay. Alderman Grover?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My question is to City Manager Bob Kowitz. Last time we went through the goal setting, we did it in a different way with giving our individual priorities, and you were calculating numbers, and the 12 that rose to the top, that bubbled to the surface, those were our goals for the year. How do you want this to unfold so that you can identify, we can add to the list? How are you envisioning that this would happen?
Alderman Grover, members of the council, my sense is that a lot of these were still in progress. And so I thought, since last time you didn't have a list, and so I thought that it was a worthwhile exercise to kind of start with the blank page. My sense is that, again, a lot of these things are still ongoing, that it was more a tweaking opportunity. If there are changes in wording, if there were, this has been done, we should add this. So it was not meant to be a larger discussion. And in formally talking with several of you, you kind of concurred that that made sense. So that's how we came in this evening.
Alderman Jean-Baptiste?
I don't, other than to restrict what it is that we think about, what we do, because the staff already has a roadmap, and it is to implement the plan. But when we talked about goals, it wasn't a matter of saying, okay, let's list the plans that we have, implement the West Side Plan, implement the Lakefront Plan. It was in the context of, we're in a city, we have budget issues, we have assets, we have liabilities. What do we do with our assets? And one of which was Lakefront. What do we do with that? Okay, and people say, you know, let's put that as an objective, developing the lakefront, thinking through how best to put it to use for the city. Now, the fact that we went through a process, that doesn't mean, again, that it is a process that is restrictive. It lays out a particular roadmap for staff to follow, and we are following it. But to then narrow the horizon, to me, is limiting. Because on the one hand, while, Alderman, you said that it's fine for people to come forward and make a proposal, but the minute they come with a proposal, it was like, you know, we put the cross in front of them. And we said, you know, we have a set of absolute, and we can't go beyond these parameters. We've got to engage in that discussion. And again, I understand your defense of being cautious in terms of what we do at the lakefront. I'm just suggesting that what we talked about when we said the goals was to open up for discussion, for debate, for vision, for ideas, different perspectives. But at the same time, we had a plan we were following. So I don't think I don't think at this particular point in time it's a question of trying to redefine, restate, and re-entitle what it is that we say ought to be one of our goals. If we want to change, we want to add another one, we want to put a subset. That subset of that is to implement the master plan, the Lakefront master plan. That's fine, because we have other subsets, but I don't think it's a question of limiting that goal. And that's my last intervention anyway.
Madam Mayor, may I just, I think I might be able to clear some of this up very quickly.
If you can get us out of this, because one of my goals is to end meetings on the same day in which we begin the meetings. As Alderman Nguyen taught me, that's a very valuable goal.
To go home the same day that we all came. I withdraw my motion.
Thank you.
And clearly, this is an issue we'll just keep discussing, but we have so many other important things to talk about tonight.
Yes, we do.
Let's keep moving.
Thank you.
If my seconder would agree.
Lakefront Master Plan is the subset underneath the Lakefront Development, but I think it's very unfortunate that we chose the word we chose, because I've had people call me and I've had people reach out to me who are confused by the use of that word. It's unequivocally a confusing word. I think it's a mistake, but it really doesn't matter. I think the staff hopefully understands that what we're talking about is implementing what we've got in place.
Alderman Fisk?
Yes, just very quickly, Madam Mayor. I agree with Alderman Nguyen and Wilson. I would like that word to be changed, but I think this is a special circumstance because the promoter of this particular concept has asked for city staff assistance and support in this matter. So I think it's appropriate for us to address that.
Thank you. Alderman Rainey.
Before I say what I was going to say initially, why don't we just look at this as a list? For example, we have Northwestern University on here. There's no big, huge connotation there that, we're going to do anything special. Just leave development off, make Lakefront an item on the list, and let's move on. What I was going to say at the beginning of this meeting, which I'm sort of changing my mind on, was what a great job we've all done coming to this point, and to congratulate staff for their work and citizens in this community for their work and our work too. I think there's a whole new way of partnering between aldermen and staff. I know for me there is, and I know, work with some of the rest of you, I know there is. And Wally, you've really brought us to this point of actually saying that for once in my history, we've established goals, and we've actually worked towards some of them, which is just something that we should all feel good about. We certainly haven't accomplished everything, but I do see progress. And so let's not get bogged down in a word. Just think, it took us how much discussion to get the darn toilet built over there. And I'm sure some people think of that as lakefront development. It took us months and months to approve a food truck. And let's not bicker about these little terms. We all know there's a big picture here to deal with, and that's really what we've been doing on all of these. We've really been dealing with big picture issues, and I think that's really the way to go. And so I just think everybody did a great job. Everybody, the community, the staff, city manager, mayor, and all of us too. Nice job.
Thank you, Alderman Rainey. All right, does anyone want to pick another topic?
Please, do we have to?
You want to just okay the whole list?
We're working on, it's all work
All
in
right,
progress.
we're going to just work on all of them. Yes, Alderman Jean-Baptiste.
I remember that when we were doing this list, under safety, I had specifically talked about youth. Okay, how do we deal with, because I had youth as one of the areas of priority, but it didn't win out in the top whatever. but we wanted to make sure that we're paying attention to that, because the reality is the majority of people who are committing crimes and violations in the city are the younger folks. And I'm not saying teenagers, I'm talking about 24, 25 and under, 30 and under, or whatever. And we needed to begin to think about how do we prevent the kind of deviations that we see in terms of following social norms and stuff like that. So I wanted to ask council to consider that be a companion issue with safety in the city as we move forward and discuss the goals.
I think everyone would agree with that. At least it looks that way. Alderman Rainey?
Well, that would be the one item on here that I thought was very nebulous. And I know that Alderman Holmes and I both were concerned about this at the outset. And when I look at the way this is framed here, I don't see the issue of crime. And I just feel that it is an extremely important issue in this town, and it affects everything else. It affects economic development, it affects housing, it affects the lakefront, it affects our downtown, it affects everything. And so I'd like us to be a little more upfront on that item.
We need to add a couple more points under safety.
Alderman Nguyen?
Well, sorry. I completely agree with that, and perhaps that safety should be, as Alderman Holmes is saying, should be added. There are some additional points that should be added under it to sharpen the direction of, and I would suggest we add perhaps youth, and then I don't know whether, Alderman Rainey, whether we should have a separate issue for crime as opposed to safety, or whether it should be folded in under safety. But before that direction continues, I do want to echo what Alderman Rainey said. When we look at this list and think about where we were a year ago, I mean, September 17th, 2009, things were looking really bleak. And when I see all of what our staff and our city manager and the citizens have accomplished in the last year, I think this is more than impressive. It's a real achievement here. And we've done it all without having to spend a lot of money. And I think that's something that the staff and the city manager and all the citizens who participated in achieving this should really be commended for. And I agree with Alderman Rainey again that this is the first time we've actually benchmarked something. And I look forward to a year from now seeing how much further we've gone on all of these issues. So, but back to the safety issue, I think we should talk about that a little bit more in terms of youth and crime, and in terms of creating more initiatives or focusing the staff on that as a major goal of the City Council. Alderman Rainey is right; it affects everything.
Alderman Grover?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I don't think we want to make crime the goal.
No, not a goal.
Crime suppression.
Reduction
I think
of.
in our discussion of the goals a year ago, Alderman Holmes, you had a way of saying it that suggested crime suppression without making crime the goal. If you can help me remember. I don't know.
Crime prevention.
Crime prevention.
Crime prevention, decreasing crime,
Yeah,
not crime as a whole.
because that was the part of safety that was missing, I think, as well. We focused a lot on pedestrian and street safety, but not on risky behaviors.
All right. Seeing no further lights, does that take care of goals? We're going to keep working on the ones we've got, adding crime prevention.
Youth and crime, Madam Mayor, members of the council, youth and crime prevention.
You know, could I just say something, Madam Mayor?
Youth can be.
I'd like youth not to be right in with crime prevention, could we?
Although it's part of the truth, but you're right.
Well, could-
Youth, but under safety, crime prevention.
Yeah.
You know.
Thank you.
But we're not, you're creating a 13th goal or not?
Why not youth? Yeah, why not?
What's our
You
youth goal?
Right, yeah.
It's our youth goal.
Yeah, what's our
I mean,
youth goal?
probably Mr. Gaynor can articulate a lot of that.
You-
We talked
But-
about youth involvement in terms of, we talked about work, I'm thinking about last year, we talked about jobs for them, we talked about involvement and reaching youth that are not in the mainstream, the ones that won't make the good choices of going to the Y or to Fleetwood or to Chandler or wherever, but those that are on the street that need to be pulled in, that need it extra. So we talked about the outreach part of it. We talked about our youth coordinator in terms of doing more outreach with that. So those were the lines that we talked about last year, in terms of where we wanted to go with you.
I think essentially it's creating the conditions for, to produce, well, the conditions to have productive citizens. I mean, I think we've got to confront the reality that a lot of the negative activities that are going on are being done by youth in this community. And so if we face the fact, then we'll direct, and I know that our police department pays a lot of attention, and Doug is in charge of, youth services in general and doing a great job. But I think that we have to confront the reality that, part of the key link to our own general stability is how our youth are turning out. They could destabilize or they could be productive citizens who continue to contribute positively.
City Manager?
Madam Mayor, members of the council, let me try to help with process. I think you clearly have two separate issues. When we go back up to safety, it sounds as if you'd like to keep safety broad, have a sub-heading under crime prevention, because that's not really been the focus of the safety piece. It's been more pedestrian safety, so that we would put crime prevention as a secondary under safety issues, and that you would create a 13th goal, and may I suggest the title Youth or Youth Services, and then as we did in the past year, we would come back to you with these goals individually periodically and talk more specifically on what you'd like to see done. I think Alderman John Baptiste did a good overview of where we are right now. We've done a lot to change how we approach youth services, consolidated them all into one department. But I think that's what I'm hearing the council say is a safety goal with a subheading of crime prevention, and then a 13th goal that would either be youth in general or youth services.
How about youth engagement? I think that kind of reflects more what we're trying to accomplish with the...
Sounds great.
Alderman Rainey?
I have trouble having this conversation after watching the Human Services Committee have difficulty dealing with the issue of truancy. So I'm just a little confused. The way, we got to keep our kids in school, and whatever it takes to keep them there is what's going to help in the long run. We have youth engagement, so I have no problem leaving it on there. And I don't want to see crime be related to juveniles, because the issue that I'm concerned with crime mostly does not involve juveniles. And when I look at the Daily Bulletin, and I do know that it doesn't include everything, but the number of juveniles compared to adults on there is very small. So I think juveniles, youth are a separate issue. I want crime, blatant crime, people stealing other people's stuff, people shooting one another, families beating one another up, people getting jumped on the street for their bikes and their purses. That's what I want on here, a way to address some of those issues in our town. And I think they have to do with dealing with the Housing Authority of Cook County, people who have huge records as long as your arm, being allowed to live in subsidized housing, which I am totally opposed to. I just think we need to get on top of it. And I know our police department is doing everything they can. I was in court this morning watching, court is now becoming calendaring. That's all it is. You drag them out of Cook County, You set a date, you take them back. You bring them back, set a date. I mean, it's just crazy. So I think we need to really get a handle on what's going on. Same people over and over and over in our community are mostly doing the bad things.
Thank you. Alderman Fisk?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I do like what Wally has written in the packet about youth issues, that the goal could include an evaluation of our existing youth services and strategies for measurable objectives in helping Evanston youth. I like measurable objectives. That really is a goal to me, and it includes reporting, which I think is very helpful. If the members of the Human Services Committee think this is appropriate, I'd like to take up this goal at the next Human Services Committee meeting, if the rest of the council feels that's appropriate.
Are there any objections?
I don't have an objection, but what I still don't understand is, are we running a separate track from the schools? And I don't see any point in our operating one function over here and the schools over here. We have a city school liaison committee. What are we doing in combination with the school? The schools get most of our tax dollars. What are we doing with the schools in terms of this? So I just think it has to be a joint effort. I think having a youth initiative program, which I don't understand at all. I don't understand how it interacts with the school. If I'm confused, I think maybe a few other people could be.
Alderman Holmes and then City Manager.
I want to go way back in terms of youth engagement, that every spring when they have the youth conference at the high school, and I've made it a point of going each year, is that one of the things that I think we all have to key into is what the youth are saying in terms of what is not available to them, the kinds of things that they'd like to do, the kinds of things that they think. And Mayor Tisdale, you've been there, so you've heard them too.
Bowling alley and a place to hang out.
Absolutely, absolutely. And they want things that they relate to. And so we can come up with a whole laundry list of things that we think, but if it's not the kinds of things that they want to be involved in, that's one of the mistakes I think that we make as adults in terms of choosing what we think kids want when they're actually telling us the kinds of things that they'd like to be involved in. So that was the one thing I wanted to say. The other, in terms of crime with youth, that if we know for a fact that if we can provide activities and keep them engaged, that that is a big deterrent in terms of them getting involved in negative activity. And I would agree with Alderman Rainey in terms of looking at, we certainly do have young people involved in crime, but it's a smaller number. And I'd not like to get that mixed up with the bigger crimes that might be happening in the community. That's a whole nother safety issue. I think that the youth falls into a whole different category, and we do know how to work with some of that if we have the resources in which to do that.
Thank you. City Manager?
Madam Mayor, members of the council, I think staff share some of the frustration that you have shared this evening, and one of the tasks I asked Mr. Gaynor to take on, I've asked him to come up and maybe just talk a little bit about the work that he has done with his staff over the last several months, is how can we best do this? How can we take the existing resources that we have, make sure we're not duplicating with the school district, because clearly when Mr. Gaynor and I looked at this, we didn't have a good answer to that question. How are we not duplicating what the police department is doing? How can we take the resources that we have and make better use of them? And Doug, if you would maybe just mind spending a couple minutes talking about what kind of a assessment you've made and some of the things we're looking to move forward with over the next several months.
Sure. Mayor, members of council, city manager, we've taken a broad look at the youth that we are supposed to be focusing on, and that age is 14 to 25 or 26. And first of all, we identified that the 25, 24, and 23-year-olds are not going to be receptive to be called youth. So we're going to be calling youth and young adults. And we're focusing on a number of efforts. Number one, there are a tremendous number of resources already in the community, both District 65 and 202, the Youth Job Center, the Defender's Office, and I could give a whole list and be happy to provide a report in the near future as to where we're going. One of the programs we're looking at is the expansion of the youth the program that's been held in the summer and making this a year-round program. And we're going to focus on a mentoring or apprenticeship program. We want to work with District 202 in their Career Pathways program, which is another way of saying work-study. My understanding is they have about 42 or 45 folks in that program. But the focus is on those individuals that are not engaged, that are not going on to college, that really don't have a direction at this point. And a mentoring or apprentice program where we're looking at taking these individuals and putting them with someone. And I guess the best example is a program that I ran in California where we actually assigned folks to work with our park maintenance folks. They learned landscape maintenance. We can put them with forestry, we can put them in public works, we can put them in offices. We want to do the 50-50 program that's already been in place, and if we can't find 50-50 and we have to fund it ourselves, we're looking at CDBG funding. The township has puts in money for the budget, and there's city funds. So that's about 2 minutes, and there's a lot more that I could go on, but I think that gives you sort of an idea of where we're headed.
Thank you, Mr. Gaynor. Alderman Jean-Baptiste.
When Dr. Austin was leaving the high school, the statistics in terms of dropout was 40 kids per year who just drop out of high school. The question is, what happened to these kids? The other thing is there are a number of kids who are, I would characterize them as drop out, but they stay in the system, they put them in an alternative school, they sort of warehouse them. And these kids, they may graduate, but there's nothing going on. I mean, there's no program that they're able to go into. If they don't have mentorship, if they don't have guidance, if they don't have, an entity that intentionally pays attention to them, they fall through the cracks. And a lot of these, they interact with the police department a lot. So I think that when we think about youth in the community, the great quantity of our youth are doing very, very well. I mean, we graduate a very high percentage of kids of all race, creed, or color. As Doug said, we have an array of extraordinary programs, but there's some kids who have fallen through the cracks, and they're not showing up. They're not presenting themselves. Now, I mean, we could throw up our hands and say, okay, well, what can we do? The reality is we do something to the police department all the time. And they go through that revolving door, as Alderman Rainey talks about, because they go through the criminal justice system. Many of them have mastered it. And many of them have developed a real fatalistic kind of attitude of their lives. They perceive them as living in or out. That's where the whole sagging thing comes from. I mean, there's a fashion thing that comes out of that. So we've got a problem. And it's sometimes it's not always perceptible. We can't see it, but at the same time, it is there. And I think that if we are able to sharpen what we want to do, and I think that's what we're struggling with right now, then we'll know what, once we know what the vision, what we're trying to deal with, then, Doug will be clearer, because our youth engagement program so far, I mean, if we talk about what we need this for the youth, we need that for the youth, I don't hear the voices. I mean, we pay somebody 40 hours a week to have been the director of that, and I'm not saying that I fault him in particular, but perhaps we have not been clear. And I think it's an effort to be clear that we're engaged in right now. So, and I think, City Manager, you, Doug, and Saul, trying to get closer to that. But I think City Council itself has to sharpen its sense of where do we shoot the arrow? Because it's not everywhere. But there's a target that we need to try to identify clearly.
Thank you. Seeing no further lights on the subject of goals. City Manager, do you have what you need?
Yes, ma'am. We will come back to you periodically. First, we'll make sure that when we present the budget next month, that we put a special emphasis on these areas and let you know the resources that are available to focus on them. And then we will come back one by one with periodic updates as we've done this past year. So thank you for the time this evening.
Alderman Rainey?
I'm reminded that after the summer conference, the youth conference, we received several months later a summary of the activities, and we're told that we were going to get a full-blown report on the youth engagement department. Did we ever get that? Did I miss that? I missed it.
Madam Mayor, Alderman Rainey, we were before the council, Mr. Gaynor, was it July, the end of June, with that discussion? And we can make it available once again for the council, but that was also included.
It wasn't very memorable. I'm not, I mean, I see other people shaking their head. No, they didn't get the report.
We'd be happy to make it available again, and I'm looking to.
It was the same evening that we presented the special events presentation, and our youth services in the library and the police department also provided.
I think that's exactly what I'm talking about, being the summary.
That was the summary.
That was the summary. We were told after that in a month or so we would get a full report.
We'll go back and look at what was provided. If
Would
there's
you?
other documents that were provided, we'll make sure you get them.
I mean, as we go forward thinking about this budget, I'm thinking, since I don't have anything productive that I'm seeing there, that's kind of on one of my lists. So, not youth, but that particular program. So
And Madam Mayor, Alderman Rainey, with the departure of Mr. Hirth, we're moving the Summer Youth Employment Program to Parks and Rec, changing the name to the Youth Employment Program. And so Mr. Gaynor, through the budget process, is looking at the money that is allocated there, the money that has been allocated. Mr. Anderson and the work that he does is consolidating some of those positions. So you will see some changes as part of the proposed budget in October, and we'll make sure to spend an extra amount of time to finally point out what those changes are. But Mr. Gaynor is consolidating those budgets to use them more efficiently.
Thank you. Next is fiscal year 2010-11 mid-year financial review.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, we're moving forward on multiple tracks with the budget. As you know, we are in the midst of preparing a 10-month budget that we'll be presenting to you on October 8th. However, we are also in the midst of a 12-month budget that is 6 months in. And so what we'd like to do this evening is provide a series of presentations. First, to talk a little bit about where we are 6 months in the current fiscal year, then also to give you a preview of where we think we're at for 2011, to ask a couple questions of you as our budget preparation. Again, we're less than a month away from presenting to you a proposed budget for 2011, so we're kind of on different tracks. And as we were talking this afternoon, oftentimes we come talk about budget issues 6 months or 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks left in the fiscal year, and we're coming to you with 6 months left in the fiscal year. So it's a little bit different orientation, but Joellen Earl, our Director of Administrative Services, is here and will walk you through the various pieces of information.
Thank you, City Manager. Good evening, Mayor, members of the City Council. Tonight, we are going to go through the second quarter update as well as the budget preview, as the City Manager indicated. The first piece of it is the financial review. I'm going to talk about our general fund revenue and expenditures, our enterprise fund revenue and expenditures, our expense reduction options that are going to be forthcoming from the City Manager, and what we are going to be watching for the remainder of the fiscal year. One thing I want to point out before I start all of this is that we're 6 months into the fiscal year. Sometimes when we think about the budget preview and what you've had historically, we're about 6 weeks out of the end of the fiscal year. So we're still pretty far away from the end of the fiscal year, and you'll see some of that reflected in what I'm going to talk about. As far as the second quarter is concerned on the revenue side, The revenue is coming in pretty much as we've predicted, and it is consistent with our targets. As you can see, our revenues are about 47.9% of the budget estimate. And I'll highlight some of the revenue for you. The property taxes come in at about $9 million. A part of that was credited to last year to the tune of $1.5 million. Our real estate transfer tax is showing at 70% received based on the budget estimate. Something to point out there, however, is that we are in the real estate season, and that money comes in as the properties are sold. So as the season winds down, the revenue fluctuates. So this is one of those revenues that fluctuates throughout the year. The next one is...
Excuse me, Alderman Rainey, did you have a question?
I have a comment, and that is, while I agree with you that this has been the season for buying and selling of houses, our real estate transfer tax has exceeded budget every single month this fiscal year. So there is a trend. You have to recognize the trend. And so it's not just that right now is the season, but from March, April, May, June, July, it's all been ahead. And the good thing is this year is that we projected correctly and we didn't over-project. So I think that we have a positive here. I don't think it's a seasonal thing like, at the end of the year we get all the athletic tax. This is a trend.
Thank you, Alderman Rainey. Go ahead.
The next one, again, is cyclical, and that's our licenses and vehicle stickers. That is below budget right now, and the reason for that is that we don't receive the bulk of that revenue until the end of the fiscal year, and currently it will be until February 28th. The building permits, again, are a little bit above average. We do expect some one-time building permit revenue for larger projects. We do tend to see that every year, and we are going to be looking at whether or not we want to change that estimate for next year.
Alderman Rainey?
Yes, I would like a budget memo regarding our projection with the specific probable projects. I know that we know of some, and we've always in the past been able to project, at least to some extent, a pretty good estimate of what those revenues will be.
Thank you. Go ahead.
We are anticipating a delay in receiving some of our revenue from the state as well as our property tax. In order to prepare for that, we have discussed with several banks possibly having a line of credit available for us in the event we run into any cash flow problems later this year. So overall, the revenues are generally on track for what was projected for the current fiscal year. On the expenditure side, we are below budget right now. We're at about 45.9% of what we predicted. And again, similar to our revenue, not all of our expenditures are made consistently throughout the year. As far as the enterprise funds are concerned, the revenue for water and parking is a little bit below target, although the expenses are online. The sewer fund is on target with the budget. So that's good news. But again, we are watching water and parking right now. As I said, the parking expenditures and the water and sewer funds are tracking below budget, but part of what we're estimating here is that we don't have all of our expenses to date. What we reflect as year-to-date actuals isn't necessarily what's pending to still be paid. So even though it's showing below budget, we do know that there are additional invoices that we will be paying. In thinking about the remainder of the fiscal year and setting ourselves up for next year, which is the transitional fiscal year, the city manager is recommending an expense reduction policy. Some of this is similar to what happened last year. The first item is a hiring freeze effective immediately, and he will be using his discretion with regard to any vacancies that occur and whether or not they will be filled. Reorganization will continue. We have looked at several reorganizations, some of which were implemented in this year's budget. We also are going to continue to look at outsourcing, privatization, and intergovernmental agreements. Last year, there was an expenditure control put on for all departments. Anything over $1,000 needed city manager approval. He is going to institute that, and therefore there'll be additional review of our expenditures. Any training and travel will have to be justified, and if it is going to be for out-of-state training, the city manager must approve it. And then we will be looking at our overtime. We have several departments that have overtime and callback needs, and we are going to work with the departments to see if there's anything we can do to minimize those expenditures. For the remainder of the fiscal year, there are things that we want to watch on both the revenue and expenditure side. I already talked about the line of credit in the event we have a shortfall with our cash flow due to delay in receipts from the state and possibly the property taxes. Another area that we're looking at is state revenue. One area that has been floated that could potentially be cut is the income tax by 30%, and if that happens, that would be a $1.7 million impact to that particular line item. As I mentioned, the water and parking revenues, we'll continue to watch those. And we'll also watch our estimates for service charges such as yard waste. The yard waste sticker fee is coming in a little bit below than what was projected at the beginning of the fiscal year. On the expenditure side, there will be spending restrictions imposed by the city manager. Again, we'll continue to watch the payroll, especially the year-to-year, to make sure we're tracking below, and look at the overtime costs. The fourth quarter, for snow and ice removal, we want to make sure that we watch that, and hopefully we'll stay on budget, but sometimes that tends to go over. And then our other fund expenditures, particularly workers' compensation. We're working to see what we can do to minimize those costs. As you know, we've been working hard to settle and get resolution a lot of the outstanding claims, but there is more to do in this regard. Let me back up. Does anybody have any questions with regard to the operating budget?
Nope, you've explained it very well.
Thank you. Okay, this is a one slide for the CIP update. We provided you with a summary of all of the projects and their status to date, and this slide just highlights the status. In addition to that, we did provide you with a narrative summary of every project, the project description, and its status to date. So what I thought I would do with the CIP update was just answer any questions that you have, if you have any questions about the projects, their status, and all of the directors are here as well if you have any project-specific questions.
City Manager?
Yes, Mrs. Earl or Mr. Gaynor, if you could give an update on the roof and where we are with that. That's one of our larger capital projects that we're working on right now, and I think people would be interested in hearing where we stand.
I'm going to do this because I'm very superstitious. We're about 70% done and everything's going well.
Thank you, Mr. Gaynor.
And we are, and as far as the budget, there's been one change order that the council approved a few months back for an unknown condition. Anything else we see coming?
Yeah, there is another one that's being investigated right now. It has to do with a tower at the south end of the building, but we're sort of in process right now with our architects and the general contractor to see what it involves.
Thank you. I do have one question about the CIP. I know that the library board is concerned that we have a separate line item on tax bills showing what we spend on the library. It's my understanding that the building is part of what we spend on the library, and the chiller systems were in there, et cetera. Would that ordinarily be listed under CIP and not listed as a library expense, or could we list everything that we spend on the library as a library expense?
For purposes of illustration on the tax bill?
Yeah.
The
one we get at home?
Yeah. Isn't that what they want, a line item? Where's Mary?
Madam Mayor, members of the council, my understanding is if the library fund model is moved forward and it is on the tax bill, I think your question, Madam Mayor, is could we reflect the capital costs associated with the debt service on the library in such a fund if it is created?
Could we reflect all library costs, period?
And we certainly could do that at the direction of the council.
Otherwise, it goes under the CIP, is my understanding, and people would not have a full understanding of what's spent on the library.
The debt service. May I ask one other question, Madam Mayor?
Yes.
We're also spending a lot of money at the police department on the capital improvements, Mr. Gaynor. Perhaps you could speak to the firing range and the parapet walls and the E911 work that's being done at the police department.
The tuck pointing and the parapet wall is moving along well. That is to be completed at the end of October, and we're on schedule with that. We're having some issues with the firing range. We've been working with the police chief and the architect contractor for the firing range. There's some questions that need to be raised and answered, and we're working on that. But it seems to be moving along.
And may I ask one last question?
Alderman Rainey's first, and then you can ask one last question.
That's not enough for me. I need more on the firing range. This is the longest single-running capital improvement in the history of the city of Evanston, and it is just one space. And there has to be some detective work done, some investigation done as to why nothing is ever right with the firing range. There's always something. It's been going on for years. It's asbestos, it's this, it's that, it's ventilation. It's been going on for years. And I think we need, not you, not the chief, but we need some technical information about what the heck is the real story here.
We'll be happy to provide a report to you, which will cover all the issues that you just raised.
We just have to know. I mean, there's not an alderman sitting here who hasn't heard this story before.
If I may, City Manager, some of the technical issues regarding this long-running project is, by the way the CIP's been managed since I've been in Evanston, there's come a point where we have run out of money and somebody said stop. So it's not only the nuts and bolts of making it work, it's was it authorized to move forward? And so that is also a factor in, as frustrated as Alderman Rainey is, I'm equally as frustrated, if not more so, because it has a huge impact on our training dollars and officers' time away from the city. Thank you.
And that very phrase, that very statement has been made probably 20 times in the last so many years. I mean, we've got to get to the bottom of this.
And Alderman Rainey, members of the council, we will, at this point, it is not a resource issue. This council has said this project's moving forward. I've said this project's moving forward. So at this point, it is not a resource issue, and we'll give you more complete detail, and if the council would like to talk about it further at a meeting coming up, we'd be happy to do that as well.
Well, meaning no disrespect to the chief's comments, I do not ever remember this council saying, no, you can't have money to do this job. Maybe we did, maybe we ran out of money at some point, but the time has come when we need to know exactly what's going on, who the contractors are, and why there's this problem.
Thank you.
Mayor, I wanted to ask one other question, if I could.
Go ahead, City Manager.
Another very large project we have going on, and Suzette Robinson, our Public Works Director, I believe, is in the next room, and hopefully she's listening carefully and can come out is our work on Sheridan Road. And a lot of interest on that, not only, I think, from a construction standpoint, but also from a traffic management standpoint. So, Suzette, if you wouldn't mind giving a brief update as to where we stand on the progress of that project. I know there's been concerns in the neighborhood about how we've been working with neighbors, how we've been working with Northwestern University, and if you could just give an update on that, that would be great.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, City Manager, Alderman. Suzette Robinson, Director of Public Works. Sheridan Road, we finished the first phase early this summer. And we started the second phase, which we will not complete for 2 years. And we have had more trouble with the second phase because we're moving closer to the interior of the city, closer to the university, and impacting a lot of traffic patterns. We anticipate being done with construction of that phase by November. Just before Thanksgiving is when we're going to shut down for the winter, and we will actually have half of the segment paved, at least in binder, and it will be brought up to the top so none of the manhole covers will be exposed. And then we will come back in the spring and continue.
Thank you.
That's all the questions I had.
All right. Does that complete the CIP update then?
Yes, it does.
Thank you very much. Next is fiscal year 2011 budget preview.
I've reordered this a little bit from the way it appears on your agenda, but all of the elements are here. I'm going to start with the debt management policy. I'm going to then talk about the tax survey that we did and possible revenue enhancement. I'll move into budget process and budget policy, and then get to the revenue and expenditure preview for next year. On June 21st, when we had the first quarter update, we talked a little bit about our debt capacity, and that was prior to when we issued the bonds for the general obligation debt. At that time, you asked that we look at more comparable communities when we were comparing our debt load. So we went back and we looked at two items. One was population, and the other was whether or not they had a water facility. So the list that's in front of you was compiled for that reason, in addition to the fact that we do historically use these as comparable communities. This slide shows essentially what we surmised as a result of our comparison. If you look at the first column, our total debt to our EAV ratio, which I think we may have pointed out last time, is about 9.5%. The average of the communities surveyed was about a little over 4%. When we went on with the comparison, we actually pulled out the GO debt, and the reason for that was simply because that's the taxpayer-supported debt. When we look at some of the other debt, which goes into total debt, some of that debt is supported by ratepayers, and therefore the ability to raise rates or control that debt is different than the GO debt. So we pulled out the GO debt and we continued with the comparison for that taxpayer-backed debt. So the second column shows the GO debt to the EAV. And you can see it falls a little bit in Evanston to just under 6%. The average is about 3.5%. We also calculated the debt per capita. Evanston's debt per capita is about $2,200. The average is about $1,500. And then our per capita GO debt as a percentage of per capita income is about 6% in Evanston, and the average is about 5%. So in thinking about recommending a debt management policy, we did some research, and one of the things that we thought would be helpful for the council is to think about the bond rating, which of course we have a wonderful bond rating here, and how we're going to continue to maintain that. So I pulled this list out of a Standard & Poor's publication from this summer, and it ranks the top 10 manager characteristics of highly rated credits in the United States. And in the memo I gave you, I gave examples of everything that we're doing in Evanston that support all of these items, but I just wanted to highlight them for you, and you'll see that having a debt management policy is one of the recommendations. So the first one is obviously a stabilization reserve. The second one is providing regular economic and revenue updates, and to make sure that we're identifying any shortfalls early. The third is our spending plans and making sure we have contingency plans for our operating budgets. The fourth is a formalized capital improvement plan, and also the long-term capital improvement plan. The fifth is our liability planning. The OPEB liability is other post-employment benefits, but also this contains the pension liability as well as any of the obligations that has on the future of the community. Other post-employment benefits. The sixth is a formal debt management policy. The seventh is pay-as-you-go financing, which essentially is save up and pay as opposed to borrowing for both operating and capital. Eighth is a multi-year financial plan. Ninth is effective management and information systems. And 10 is the economic development strategy. And I highlighted in the note that you did adopt an economic development strategy in January. You also asked me to look at some best practices, and I pulled out some of these that were available from the Government Finance Officers Association, some of which relate to the columns on the previous slide. GO debt per capita, 850. The tax-supported debt as a percentage of EAV, around 3%. The general fund reserves as a percentage of current year's operating budget should be somewhere between 22 and 30%. And then the debt service per capita as a percentage of income per capita, around 5%. The recommendation at this point is for the city to include in the budget policy a debt management policy. And it's a long policy, but it generally has the general guidelines, which I have listed there, debt issuance guidelines, and then the debt administration. What I'm recommending you include are, in the first one, it's really an either-or. The GO debt should be about $900 per capita, or about the 5% of debt per capita as a percentage of per capita income. And the reason why that seems to be so far afield from that prior slide, if you recall, our debt in the dollar amount is $2,200, about $2,250, and we're at about 6%. And the reason why it's an either-or is you probably want to consider equalizing that based on your ability to pay. If you look at some of the comparable communities, they may have a much lower dollar amount, but their per capita income is also much lower too. So the percentage changes or the dollar amount changes. So that's why they're together in that guideline. The second one is...
Excuse me, Alderman Burris.
Okay, under the notion of best practices and the guidelines you're coming up with, could we have a reference on where you're getting that information of where you're getting the best practices? And also, the per capita as a percentage of per capita income, that doesn't necessarily really help us a lot as a city. That may help the people spending money, but as far as our debt ratio, I don't think that that's really something that is that telling. I mean, it's really the only, when you look at the numbers, the only percentage that we even fall close to being on average. But I would just like to see the actual reference materials on these best practices. Thank you.
The source document is the Government Finance Officers Association, which is where these were pulled from. And I agree with you. That is the one that we're closest to. But again, the reason why that one is in there is because of the ability to pay, not necessarily the fact.
But it's not our ability, the city's ability to pay. That money's not, that per capita is not necessarily in our pockets. So the EAV makes a whole lot more sense. I'm just saying, we're doing a lot of comparisons, and the only one that even remotely comes close to being positive is this one, and I'm not sure that this one is the one that we want to hang our hat on, is my point.
I agree, and that's why there's several. This is one within, there's four, and this is one.
And Alderman Burris, members of the council, if the council would not like to have this wide range of measures and would like to have a narrower range of measures, that's fine. We just want to make sure that we're providing you the breadth of what other communities do. That doesn't make, since another community does it, it makes it right for us. But we want to make sure you're at least aware of what other communities do.
I think Alderman Burris was saying that it's, she's just evaluating that measure. I don't think it's a question of not having one.
Alderman Grover?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Director Earl. What is, under best practices, it's listed, general funds reserve as a percentage of current year's operating budget. Where is Evanston? Best practices at 22 to 30%.
It's over 20%. And the reason why I didn't put that one in is because, and we'll get into a discussion about it later, it depends on how you reserve the money. You have a general fund reserve that's designated, you have a general fund reserve that's undesignated, you have some funds that are unrestricted but designated. So when you put all the money together, we fall into the range. But I was trying to stay away from that because you get into a debate, I would think, and that's why I didn't include it, as to how you're really coming up with the 22 to, I believe it was 33%. So I thought it was best that we don't include that one. It was an example, and it could be included, but I didn't recommend it.
I've just wondered. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Okay, the second one is the EAV. It's the market value of the property should not exceed 3%. And the last one is the ratio of the debt service expenditures as a percentage of general fund expenditures should not exceed 10%. Now, I did not include that in the column because it's really hard to try and get that information. The source data for all of the communities were the 2008 CAFRs, and it's really hard to extrapolate this information, but I can tell you that if we look at our, in Evanston, ratio, we're at about 12% right now, and that is how much we're paying in debt to our general fund, the 8.3%.
Alderman Rainey?
Are all of these communities in Cook County?
No.
Well, I know Cook County does valuations and taxing different than any other county in the United States of America. So that's a fact.
No, you're
Nobody
you're
else does.
right.
So I'm just wondering if that makes a difference here. If some of the communities are outside of the county, and if their assessed, if their equalized assessed valuation is done with a different formula than ours, that would be my only question.
I know the vast majority of them are in Cook County, so I would have to go back and look at that.
I don't know where Elgin is. Is Elgin in Cook County? I don't know.
No.
Aurora isn't in Cook County.
That's the summary of the information that I have for the debt management policy, and the recommendation is to include the debt management policy as part of the budget policy. And I'll get to that as to how it's included later on, but that's what I wanted to highlight as far as debt management was concerned.
Thank you.
The next area is the tax survey and revenue enhancement. And the memorandum that you were provided with on that just generally talks about taxes. I know there's one or two fees in there, but it generally talks about taxes. When we look at next year, we're going to look at fees and other charges for services, but the one area we focused on this year was taxes. So generally, they fall into the categories I have listed there, which are the locally assessed taxes, the property taxes by the county, and they're remitted to us on a periodic basis. The county also does collect our cigarette stamp, tax stamp revenue, and they do remit that to us as well. That's a change that we administered, or that we decided to do this year. And then we have the taxes collected by the state and remitted to us on a monthly basis. We have utility taxes, and then we have our locally assessed taxes. These are the surveys that we can, the communities that we compared ourselves to in the survey. And again, some of these are historic, Some of them are not historic, but they're close in proximity. And one of the thoughts was that if you're looking at taxes and how you compare, it would be important to look at the surrounding communities. So Lincolnwood would normally be in there, but we added it because of its proximity.
And Ms. Earl, before you move forward, maybe we can just do the counties. All of those cities are in Cook County, except Elgin, Aurora, Naperville. Is that correct? Thank you.
Alderman Rainey?
When you're talking about a tax survey, are you talking about non-property tax survey?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
I think you should include Chicago.
We did.
Oh.
It's
Oh,
the
there it
third
is.
one down. And there's two, I categorize this into general and other as to what we looked at. The taxes that appear up here as general, other than the vehicle sticker fee, are charged in all of these communities. So we have amusement, the athletic contests, cigarette, E911 landline, gasoline, hotel, motel, liquor, parking lot, garage, prepared food and beverage, real estate transfer, sales tax, utility, and vehicle sticker fee. So those taxes, I shouldn't say they're all charged in every community, but they are in the majority of them. This group of what I'm considering other taxes are charged in the city of Chicago. We actually went forward and looked at whether or not these would be some types of taxes that we wanted to bring forward for consideration. However, we are prohibited by statute in some cases because it's legislation for the city of Chicago based on population. The two examples up there that I can think of off the top of my head are the fountain soft drink and the soft drink tax. So again, on the general taxes that are charged by the city and the comparable communities, what we found was that we're pretty comparable. One thing that sticks out that I know you're all aware of, but I felt it was important to highlight, was that we're high on liquor tax and we're low on the prepared food and beverage. And then when you look at other taxes that could possibly be increases to yield additional revenue, we have amusement, the electric utility, gasoline, and prepared food and beverage. And at the bottom of the slide, I indicate again, those other taxes are only charged in the city of Chicago, and we're not recommending bringing any of those, some of which are prohibited by law. So going forward, based on something that could possibly be considered for this year, the first one is to increase the electric utility tax. If we increase it to the state tax, the revenue would be approximately $100,000. And then if we want to consider looking at the gasoline tax for an increase, the 1 cent increase would yield about $170,000. Now, these two estimates are for an annual basis, but I thought it would be important for you to see what it could yield on an annual basis. And at the bottom of the slide, I show that the gas tax right now in Chicago is 5 cents, Skokie is 3 cents, Wilmette is a penny, and we currently charge 3 cents in Evanston. And thank you. That's the information I had on the tax survey, if you had any questions.
I was just going to say you explained it perfectly, and everyone understood it except the city manager.
We think, given the deficit that we're projecting, that it's reasonable to look at these as adjustments. And so our plan is to, without other direction, is to look at these as adjustments. And as we prepare the budget for your review on October 8th, we are going to seriously consider adjustments to the electric utility and the gasoline tax.
Thank you. That's your only question.
My only question.
Okay, the budget process is very brief. The budget process is...
Oops, Alderman Rainey.
I want to know, what extraordinary measures have we taken lately to collect what's owed us?
I can respond to that if you'd like, City Manager. We actually are finalizing the RFP that we put out to hire a collections agency. We have some revenue that we could probably do a better job collecting. So we will bring back to the council a proposal to bring in a third party to help us get the remaining, maybe not the remaining, but, some of the remaining money that is owed to the city. And administrative
already have-
adjudication, parking.
But don't we already have a collection agency that
We
does that
Duncan
billing?
helps us with the parking, but I'm not sure if we have another one. I know that we're looking at getting a new one for the remaining revenue and consolidating it.
We have one for water, do we not, that goes and
Oh,
tries to collect our
UO.
water?
I think it's,
Or
I think it-
I mean,
We have not been as satisfied with our collections efforts as we think would be appropriate, and so we're looking at making a change there. And it's a multifaceted change. The first part is this RFP. The other is looking at some of the thresholds that we currently go after. I think combined together, we can do a better job of collecting money owed us.
but it would be across all indebtedness.
That's correct, and that's been the other, and thank you for bringing that up. That's been the other problem. In some areas, we do a very good job. In other areas, it's almost non-existent. And so what we're trying to do under Mrs. Earle's direction is to look at collections citywide under administrative services and not have it be solely the responsibility of the operating department. We think that will make a lot of sense. Administrative adjudication is a huge area that has not been pursued. One of the reasons we discovered it has not been pursued is that our collection agency will not go after fines less than $100. And when your standard fine in administrative adjudication is $75, that has created unique challenges. So we are looking again at not only adjusting our collection efforts, but we also are looking at adjusting our fine structure in administrative adjudication that perhaps would make better sense. And Mr. Farrar is here, I believe, in the next room, and he can speak to the efforts he and his staff have been undertaking for the last several months, if you'd like.
Just one comment on that. We can adjust the structure of the fines all we want. If we don't get hearing officers who are going to impose some of those fines, then, there's nothing to collect.
And as you are aware, Alderman Rainey, we have dismissed the majority of hearing officers within the last several months and now have four, is it, Mr. Farrar? Four new hearing officers? Three new hearing officers. We were carrying five. We're now, I believe, down to four. One continuing and three new. And we share the council's concern that there were some issues with the hearing officers. The three that are no longer with us were with us for 10 years since the creation of the administrative adjudication process, and Mr. Farrar and I felt it was important to make that change.
Thank you. Go ahead, Director Earle.
Thank you. The next item is the budget process. This is one slide. It's very brief. Our budget process right now needed to be updated just simply because of the changes to the fiscal year, the dates, and then it was rewritten to make sure that it reflected your goal of transparency and the efficiency and effectiveness of services. So the fact that we're having community process, having multiple meetings, and making sure that the information that is created and distributed during the budget process is available to the citizenry or any interested party on the website is how the policy was changed. So it's again, it's for the dates and generally the process of the budget and the transparency.
No questions. Oh, I lied. Alderman Rainey.
Televised is another form of transparency for the budget process, I think. And I mean, not everybody's going to go and read all these volumes, but they will watch it and get some sense of where their money's going, I think.
That is true. Thank you, Alderman Rainey.
Okay, the last area is the budget policy, and there's been several changes in the budget policy. Primarily, the first one is, again, the fiscal year change needed to be updated. And then there's three other areas that were changed. One area was the fund policy area to reflect the appropriate uses of reserves. The second was the fund reserve policy section, and that was updated to provide better stabilization. And then the last part was the inclusion of the debt management policy. So the fund policies themselves, we thought it was important to make sure that we clarified the use of the general fund. So it's very clear in there now that the one-time revenues cannot be used for ongoing expenditures. So an example I can give you is if we sell a piece of property, that's a one-time revenue. We're not going to use that to fund ongoing expenditures. The second part of that is one-time revenues, however, may be used for one-time expenditures.
Excuse me, Alderman Rainey has a question.
I heard you the other evening make a statement regarding building permits, where you mentioned that a large building permit revenue was a one-time revenue and should not be spent in the general fund. And I couldn't disagree with that more. If we had taken that policy over the last 10 years and not spent these huge building permit revenues on operating, because that was one of our main sources of revenue, we wouldn't have been able to do some of the things that we did. I think you have to budget those revenues for the times you're in. You don't budget big building permit revenues when you're not going to have a building boom, so you're not in any fear of spending a giant one-time revenue. I just think that we have to take those revenues year by year, just like with real estate transfer tax. You know, every now and then, previous clerks would say, whoops, we have, the reason why we met our budget this month is because we had $1 million sale. Well, we have $1 million sale every month. And it got redundant after a while. We have to be able to figure out what revenues we're going to get and what are the conditions in the economy that are going to generate those revenues. I think if some of these buildings come online that are in the quote-unquote pipeline, I sure don't want to see those revenues set aside for I don't know what. I'd like to see them used in our general revenue fund.
I agree. I think what I was highlighting with the example of the building permit revenue and the real estate transfer is that it fluctuates.
It's
a fluctuating revenue. And Marty and I have had the discussion of where does the water rise to a comfortable level of budgeting, because we know it fluctuates, which is different from the sale of a piece of property, which is truly a one-time revenue. So
The sale of a piece of city property, of course. I couldn't agree with you.
So I agree with you, and we're actually talking about those two examples, one, the building permits and the real estate transfer, on how should we budget for those, knowing that probably every year there is a big project, but to come up with a level for a revenue estimate that we feel as if we can make every year. If we exceed that, then maybe that goes someplace else for a separate fund.
I think we have the ability to make that projection accurately, unlike we did in the last couple of years, where we knew we weren't, we were just trying to avoid a tax increase, so we pretended we were going to have a big that's not good budgeting. But I believe that over the years we have learned that we can project accurately those items.
The next area is the insurance fund, and as you know, with the intergovernmental agreement with the IPBC, the Intergovernmental Personnel Benefits Cooperative, we are trying to build fund reserves. We're building them at the IPBC, and we also want to build a fund reserve in our insurance fund, so over time we can stabilize the costs for all of our insurance. What's included in this fund is our health insurance, our workers' compensation. So one of the strategies here is if we don't have as many claims to resolve, or if our medical payments can come in, that we would like to try and keep the money in the fund as opposed to turn it back to the general fund. And again, over time, there would be a little bit more stability. Same idea is with the fleet fund. An example I can use there is Lonnie just put out to bid an ambulance, which you just approved at your last council meeting, and it came in $40,000 under budget. An idea here would be to let that money stay in the fleet fund. So over time, if there's a balance in the fleet fund, we could do some more pay-as-you-go financing as opposed to having to borrow, possibly for purchases. So again, this is a strategy to put some money in reserves for these funds if we can find some economies of scale in our normal operations.
Alderman Rainey?
Speaking of the insurance fund, which is my least favorite fund of all of ours, I would like to know if we've ever done any comparative analysis between workers' compensation claims in the city of Evanston versus other communities, accidents, injuries, et cetera, versus other communities. I have nothing to base this on, but it seems like we have a tremendous amount. Now, if we had the analysis, it might show that we're a very safe community, but I have no way to know that.
Actually,
Did you do that?
We did it, and it was very difficult to get the information on claims from communities. So, and we had a meeting about this morning about strategy.
Really?
Yes, so it's a very timely question. As far as how do we work in the insurance fund, because workers' compensation is exceedingly expensive. So one of the things that we thought about doing was really becoming good friends with some of our comparable communities so we can get the data. It's just not posted anywhere. You really need to drill down and sit with them and go through claims. Just like, you get a copy of the claims analysis. That's a lot of work that Bob Gustafson does for you. It's not readily available in other communities. So we are going to do that. And we've asked Bob this morning to start that analysis again. And then the second part of it is, from a policy standpoint, how are we dealing with our workers' compensation settlements? And we obviously have to pay the medical claims, but that settlement strategy, we just met this morning again with the city attorney. We're looking at use of attorneys and how do we work to continue to try and bring those costs down. So it's twofold.
But it would seem to me an area where regionalism could come into play, that there must be risk managers in some communities. We used to have one who I thought did a great job, and then he went to Northwestern. But there must be, aren't there like municipal risk manager organizations or associations?
There's IRMA, I guess it's Illinois Municipal Risk Association.
They have anything to say on this?
We are not a member of IRMA, but we certainly can look at that and get more information. I mean, it is something that's a timely discussion. It's something we're always looking at trying to do a better job at, and we can certainly consult some of the pools that are available for municipalities to seek some guidance and look at some best practices. Okay, the last one is the debt service fund, and in the budget policy, there is a reference to the debt service fund, and that has been updated to make a reference to the debt management policy. So there's a paragraph or two about debt service, but then it defers to the debt management policy for more specific guidelines and procedures to follow with regard to debt. The next portion of the budget policy is the fund reserve policy. One of the things that we added to this was to increase the unrestricted and undesignated fund balance from 10 to 12%, or between 10 to 12% for the general fund. Presently, it's 8.3%. Now, if you look at the policy, the way it's written, it said it should be. It doesn't say it absolutely has to be, because remember, this is unrestricted, undesignated fund balance, or cash. And what we'd like to move to is to making sure that we achieve that goal by the end of 2012. And the reason why we picked that year is simply because as we look at the transitional budget, we're really looking at 3 budget years. We're looking at, and I'll get to it a little bit more in detail in the next slide or two, but we're looking at revenue expenses for this year, revenue expenses for the 10-month, and then the next year. So to try and achieve something short-term, meaning, by the end of next year, is probably an unrealistic goal. So again, it says should in the policy, and there's a time frame associated with it.
The city manager has a question or comment.
Just a comment, Madam Mayor. This goes back to Alderman Burris's point on measures. Unrestricted, undesignated, in my opinion, is the most valuable measure because it gives you the most latitude and it's the most truth in advertising of money that you have the ability to put wherever you need to put it. If it is restricted in any way, obviously there's restrictions. If it is designated in any way, there is somebody out there who has said that money should be put aside for a purpose, and that ties your hands. So we want to talk more in the future with using this term unrestricted and undesignated. We've not referred to our fund balance, our fund reserve in that specific sort of way. But again, it goes back to Alderman Burris's point. You can get any kind of numbers you want to get. This is a valuable number because it provides the council with a number that you have the maximum flexibility. So we hope that we could achieve an increase to 10% by the end of 2012 and then look toward moving toward a 12% reserve as we move forward. I think strictly speaking, even though the policy is 8.3, Mr. Lyons, I think we're a little bit above that right now. We're at 12.
We're at about 11 million on our 90 million or 85 million. So.
One of the unintended consequences of reducing your budget and leaving your reserves about the same as your percentage goes up. Yeah. So that's what we've experienced. So we want to, as you'll hear in a little bit, we may have some need for one-time money to balance out revenue and expenditures, how they fall during a 10-month budget year. But I think, as Mrs. Earle has mentioned, we feel very confident that by the end of 2012, back to a regular 12-month budget cycle, that we'll be able to do that.
The last area for the fund reserve policy is an addition. Essentially, what we're putting in is other funds not specifically identified. And basically, this is if you have a special revenue fund or you want to set up another fund, the policy would be that you can't set up a fund if your expenditures are going to exceed your revenues. So it's just a protection in place. If for any reason you want to create a new fund, it can't be at a deficit. As far as the next year's budget is concerned, I just put up here a list of meetings that are upcoming and some other deadlines. So the proposed budget is due to the City Council on Friday, October 8th. You have 2 scheduled Saturday workshops on October 23rd and November 6th. The public hearing and the Truth in Taxation hearing is on November 8th. There are optional meetings on the calendar for Monday, November 15th and Wednesday, November 17th, and the anticipated budget adoption is Monday, November 22nd. There's a methodology that we've put together to develop this budget, and the trick to it is, as I said before, it's really looking at 3 years. And the reason for it is because, and I have it listed there, you have to look at your impact, your revenue with regard to when does it come in? Does it come in on a monthly basis, or does it come in seasonally? Your expenditures, and there's 3 categories there. You have monthly expenditures, you have seasonal expenditures, and you have annual expenditures. So for example, we may pay our insurance bill once a year. If we pay it in July, we need all of the money this year, all of the money next year, and all of the money the following year. So we can't prorate that for a 10-month budget. The last area is our service delivery. And really, we look at how are our services delivered. Personnel costs, for example, are 10/12 for the 10-month budget. However, we have a full construction season. We have a full season at the lakefront, recreation programs, but we don't have snow and ice. So we have to look at what happens throughout the year and when we're looking at the budget development. We're looking at our revenue, and I talked a little bit about this before, but one of the things that could potentially impact us is if we have a decrease to our income tax. We've heard 30%, and if that happens, it would be a $1.7 million impact. And again, that's annually. We are projecting most of our revenues to be flat based on today's receipts. And again, I mentioned at the beginning, we're only 6 months into the fiscal year, so it's kind of hard today to say, wow, this revenue's done a lot better than expected, or it's way off, because we still have time that's working against us, so to speak. However, we do have a few that we're looking at changing. One is the transfer station fee. Suzette Robinson came forward with her proposal. You're going to be looking at that and considering it at your next meeting. If a transfer station fee or the tonnage fee at $2 a ton is enacted, then it would start in January, and that would net $300,000 for the fiscal year. We're looking at increasing the right-of-way permit fee. The possible tax enhancements I already highlighted, the electric utility and gasoline. And then, again, the revenue fluctuations. And how do we look at that and make sure that we're comfortable with an estimate that we're bringing forward? So right now, you know, we're seeing things, they're coming in a little bit better, but we want to continue to look at that and see how we predict that for you. The next area is consideration of establishing reoccurring revenue sources to provide funding for our funds. So I talked a little bit about the insurance fund. I talked a little bit about the fleet fund. Another one is the capital improvements fund. You know, how do we let that money fall back into the fund as opposed to the general fund so it is unreserved but designated? So if it's in that fund, you're going to use it for that purpose unless there's some compelling reason not to, but that's what we're trying to set ourselves up for going forward so we have fund balance in these other areas. And then the last area, and the city manager just highlighted this, is possibly using reserves to replace lost revenue for 1 year. Again, when we look at the 3 years, next year's budget will not have January, February revenue. We actually already costed that out. It's about $850,000 that we won't receive, because that's business license fees, vehicle sticker fees, and there's about, I don't know, 15 things on the list. So we may come back in the budget, in the proposed budget, through the city manager to possibly say we need to do this for 1 year. It's a one-time situation. On the expenditure side, we need to look at our funds and make sure we're actually budgeting for all of our needs. One of our issues is compensated absences payable. We have contractual agreements and we have payouts. Over the years, we have done a good job, I think, of actually estimating our payroll. And in that spreadsheet, we have base pay, you know, sick compensation, if people can take advantage of the sick leave payout. We have uniform allowance. I mean, everything that relates to a specific employee in a specific position we're estimating. One of the things that we have fallen short on is these compensated absences payable. So for example, every year, if people have a comp time payout, a holiday payout through the Teamsters, we pay that out. It's a contractual obligation, and we just want to make sure that we have enough money in the budget to meet all of those obligations. Another strategy is by paying them out in today's dollars, we reduce the long-term unfunded liability. So we think this is a good idea. We've been negotiating our contracts to make sure that this happens in the short term as opposed to accruing that liability long term. The next area that you'll see are the continued efficiencies. Again, Suzette Robinson highlighted the changes to solid waste at your last meeting, and you will be getting a presentation next meeting on the 311. Next area is new efficiency. We're looking at our license plate recognition software. By doing that, we'll be more efficient with our PEOs, our parking enforcement officers. We will be reducing that staff because of the fact that we will be more efficient. The positions that we're looking at are currently vacant, but that is an efficiency. We are also looking at other opportunities in this area. Unemployment compensation is an expenditure that's very high right now. It's over budget. We just couldn't budget as much as we needed for the current year, but we knew that over time it would level off because of the fact that eventually people are not on unemployment any longer. So we're going to look at those expenditures and see if we make adjustments there. And then the last area is our reoccurring increases. Health insurance will be going up 10 to 12% next July. Again, we were held constant for 19 months. That 19 months is up next July. And that's what we're seeing. That could be the potential increase. We have some negotiated salary increases that we'll be including. And then again, back to workers' compensation, we are looking at the insurance fund and making the appropriate adjustments to make sure we have enough money there as well. So when we look at a deficit, we looked at a 12-month number, and these are things that you would normally expect to see that are increases, but do contribute to our deficit. So we have union contracts, and we have the deficit related to that for Barrett, Cola, and for the union employees. The health insurance, we're projecting about $750. IMRF increase. The IMRF increase, one part of it related to last year's budget. The other part relates to the paying off of the debt for the ERI payoff that we just made to IMRF. Unfortunately, last year in the budget, not all of the employees had funds put aside for their IMRF obligation. It's specifically related to some part-time employees, but because of that, we need to make an adjustment. Again, as I said before, our spreadsheet is very comprehensive. We've captured all of that now, but it's new money that we need to bring forward for next year. And then the last area is unemployment. We are just underfunded in unemployment, and that's what we're looking at as our exposure for next year. And then I'm basically finished at this point. There's two things. One is the direction that's been already provided by the city manager, which was to the department heads, and he instructed us to submit budget reductions equivalent to 5%, so we can look at the deficit and how we address it. And then the second area is for the council, and it really is just some direction that we're seeking this evening with regard to the budget process and policy and whether or not you're comfortable including the debt management policy, because those two items, the budget process and budget policy, are part of the budget, the proposed budget that you'll be receiving. And then lastly is if you had any direction you wanted to give with regard to the tax enhancement.
Alderman Rainey.
One of the things that, I mean, very impressed with your presentation, but one of the things that I can't understand at this point, having just heard the presentation, is how will some of the policy changes affect the levy we're going to be responsible for passing? That's the piece I don't understand. If we're going to be adding in things that we didn't normally. And then I have one other recommendation.
Madam
I
Mayor.
guess I'm just a little confused.
I think badly was the way I was thinking it would impact the levy.
I was hoping that you were so wrong.
Madam Mayor, Alderman Rainey, I think at this point we don't see it, at least in this cycle, impacting the levy. I think that we're saying that many of these goals are goals, and that we're not asking for the council to make dramatic changes with that. I think we see some opportunities, perhaps with some one-time money, to make some adjustments there. We're also going to be looking at a budget that has additional layoffs. We're going to be looking at the budget that has additional contraction of the city budget. We're not saying that we're going to come to you with a solution that is all revenue-based. I think we are saying this evening that we see that there will be revenue options that we'll be putting forward, but there will also be reductions. And so we think there'll be a balance, and these policies that we're asking you to revise set us on a new course. We really feel that coming out of the 10-month budget in 2012, hopefully with other changes that we're seeing not only within the city government but in the regional and national economy, as we turn that corner, then those policies come into play, and I think we can fulfill the goals of those policies better 2012 and beyond than we can in 2011.
Okay, I have 1.5 more things to say. The half thing is the psychology of going to the new budget year with 2011 being a 9-month budget, will there be a humongous tax revolt in 2012 because people will then be levied for a year versus 9 months, and people are going to panic because there's going to be this huge increase?
And we plan to levy for a full year, so there will not be that. And we will have to shift money amongst our fiscal years to match the levy year. And that is one of the challenges that Mrs. Earle mentioned, looking at this not as 1 year, but really 3 years, so that we don't have those kind of revolts. I mean, it doesn't matter from a resident standpoint, 12 months is 12 months. We can begin and end those 12 months however we choose. We have a unique opportunity or a unique challenge with a 10-month budget. We have to smoother out some of those edges. Our residents don't care. Our residents don't want to pay extra money in order to smooth out those edges, and we're not going to ask them to.
So there won't be any visible change in terms of the amount, the total budget?
That's correct.
Amount. Okay.
There'll be no visible change to the money that our taxpayers are paying.
Okay. I think we need to make that really clear, because I'm a little confused about that, but I'm not anymore. But I think it might be worth some education on that. The other point, the full point I want to make is something I tried to get us to do last year, which we did not, and that is take our TIF districts, and I know every year we do budgets for that revenue that we get, the increment, but I don't think we're doing enough. The demands, the activities in our TIF districts plague us with are far exceed prior to the establishment of those districts. And I would like us to find every conceivable expense that we can charge against the increment to be charged. I think we've been very incremental in the charges we make to those districts. And I don't know that we've looked real carefully lately at some of the additional expenses we can charge against the increments.
Alderman Rainey, members of the council, the fiscal health of each of our TIF districts are very different. And I think what we're trying to do is look at each one by one, to see are they paying their way as Illinois state law intends them to pay their way? Are they producing economic change the way they're supposed to produce economic change? Are we spending the money in the areas that we need to? Mr. Lyons, although he's in community and economic development, has been moonlighting, helping us with the very issues that Alderman Rainey is mentioning. So I think you will hear from us and hear from Mr. Lyons as part of the proposed budget. I think some fairly significant changes overall in how we handle TIF in order to address some of the issues you raised, Alderman Rainey.
Well, then could you share those with us, because I'm not aware of some of them.
Well, I think, let me try in general terms.
I mean, not right now, but as we go through
but this is an important issue, and I think tonight's really to start raising some flags on issues that are going to be discussed in the community over the next several months. I think we're looking at the amount of money from a programmatic standpoint that are charged to each of the TIFs. We're looking at the amount of overhead that is charged for each of the TIFs. We are looking at the future of each TIF as far as how many years are left on the TIF. We are looking, as is the city of Chicago and other communities, at perhaps making a one-time refund to the taxing jurisdictions from one or more of the TIFs. And I think we are looking at the opportunity to recreate or re-boundary at least two of the TIFs in order to make better use of the tax increment that's coming. So those are 3 or 4 things. I don't want to get in, I don't want to really name names, but I think those address the issues that you're raising in order to maximize that. I guess the city of Chicago is under a lot of scrutiny for their TIFs, and I think you're going to hear for those cities that have calendar year budgets, you're going to hear a lot of discussion about the kinds of things we're already doing. We are in consultation with our experts that help us sort through things. We've asked them to get us some information on some best practices on overhead that other communities are using. We're also, again, looking at some of these other options I've described. So it may not be huge dollars for 2011, but it could be bigger dollars in 2012 and beyond.
Well, as long as we know what
And that's the reason, Alderman Rainey, one of the reasons we're here this evening is we want to start raising those issues. I think the efficiencies are not done. I mean, we are looking at ways to continue to bring efficiencies to all of our operating departments. In some cases, that's going to mean less staff, and we are going to bring forward staff reductions in this budget. On the flip side, we are also going to be bringing to you staff increases because with 311, we are looking basically to shift responsibilities from some parts of our operating departments to one central point. And to do that, we are going to need to hire a different group of employees with a different skill set. And so while we are making those efficiencies, we will not only be eliminating positions, but we will also be adding a few positions in order to make the service we provide to the residents of Evanston more efficient and overall cost us less money in the long run.
Thank you. Alderman Burris?
I wanted to agree with Alderman Rooney on the tax increment financing situation. I think that it's something not only from the budget perspective, but also as an economic development perspective, and that economic development team should have a really strong understanding of TIF and have hopefully, bring in knowledge from other communities on how we're utilizing those funds. I think that's really important. But what I really wanted to say is I think that this debt management policy is outstanding. I think it's a great start for us, and the overall budgeting policy, which it is very clearly laid out what we're trying to do, why we're doing it, in very much in layman's terms. I think that's very important for transparency, for citizens. Obviously, the council, most of us, we live and breathe it, so we understand it. But for folks that don't, it's really important to have it laid out this way. But once again, I think the debt management policy, maybe other than the pension situation, maybe number two most important problem that we have and that we need to focus on. I know we talk a lot about other smaller issues, and we spend a lot of rhetoric on that, but these are the meat and potatoes. This is what's going to either keep us afloat or take us down, and these are the things we should be talking about. So thank you so much to everyone who put these guidelines together.
Thank you. Alderman Jean-Baptiste?
Yeah, I agree in parts with Alderman Burris about the debt policy initiative. I think it's very, very needed. But in terms of the tax increment financing utilization, these TIF districts are set up for a particular purpose, and I think we have to be cautious as we approach the expenditures and set out some real deliverables, and look at it in the context of, the budget year. What do we want to accomplish? And go after those accomplishments. Because I think to a certain extent we've been somewhat timid when I look at the West Side plan, when I look at, what's being done, we're slow. Even the planning process, we've been able to get that started in the industrial kind of district, but that's slow. And sometimes I think we throw in a lot of staff at at the process to get small outcomes. So I would advise caution in terms of the expenditures, but also caution in terms of not just being spontaneous, but planning out what we're doing and go after it so that years don't go by and we've had this TIF district and very little has been accomplished in that particular district. Okay.
Thank you. Alderman Holmes?
City Manager, I just wondered, are you looking at any movement in terms of licenses or fees for home businesses and also for rentals? Can we revisit that ordinance again? I think it's really time. I think it's timely. I think it's something that is necessary for us, and I'd like to see that come back again.
And Alderman Holmes, members of the council, our interim community and economic development director is working with his staff, I believe for your next meeting, to talk about the issue of home-based businesses and the issues associated with that. Also, Alderman Holmes and Alderman Rainey have raised the issue of churches in a variety of different zones, and so those are both traveling together, and I'm looking at Mr. Lyons, and I believe while we will not have answers for you or prepared ordinances, we're planning on having these for discussion at the appropriate committees on the 27th.
Thank you. Alderman Fisk?
Thanks, Madam Mayor. City Manager, I'm curious as to what the mayor's budget task force is doing and whether it's looking in detail the same way that we are, or whether they're doing a big picture consideration.
Madam Mayor, Alderman Fisk, the group met last week, 2 weeks ago, for the balance of it was the evening of your award meeting, so that was about 2 weeks ago now, for the balance of an evening to begin working on a report. It is still their current plan to come to the council at your next meeting on the 27th. My sense is that it's a big picture report versus very specific recommendations. They have spent a number of months talking about many of the issues we've covered this evening. Water, use of properties. I think they've talked a little bit about TIF districts. Debt. There has been a back and forth. Mr. Lyons and I have tried to be at all their meetings over the course of the last year. But their plan still is to come on the 27th with the report.
Well, it may be.
It may slip.
It may not happen on the 27th because those members who consulted me, I said I'd rather have a plan you all can sign off on that you feel is correct than a plan that meets a deadline that's arbitrary. So don't count on it on the 27th. Alderman Grover.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We've had one community budget workshop already. I wondered if you had a brief report on how many folks came and what participation was like, and do we have any feedback?
Most of that side of the room was there. We had probably about 40 folks at the first workshop. I think we were very businesslike in our process. The group, as the council does, asked a series of questions that they've asked us to get back to them on. Our goal is to have that document prepared by the end of the week and put on the budget website prior to their next meeting, to the second and final budget workshop, which will be on the 29th of September at the Levy Center.
And our budget web page is up and running, and we're starting to fill it with information and documents and
That's
schedules.
correct, and the documents from this evening will be up there. I believe the video from the workshop is already there. We're also having a way for residents to provide comment and feedback. The meeting on the 29th will be a process of us answering the questions that were raised at the first meeting, and then there will be a listing of budget suggestions and a prioritization. We'll then make that available on the website as well for residents to chime in on, so that we can get feedback over that first weekend in October and have that all done and finished by the 4th of October, so that any adjustments that would be appropriate in the proposed budget before it comes out that end of that week can be made.
And was participation in the first workshop a predicate for participating in the second workshop?
No, it wasn't. Not like the process that we did last year.
All right, so the process is still wide open if anyone wants to come join the discussion.
Process is still wide open.
Thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Tandem?
Thank you. I was at the first budget workshop, and I do want to say that Ms. Daly did a terrific job of graphically and verbally communicating with the group. I would like to encourage all the aldermen to see if they can bring out some more people, more diversity, send some reps from your ward if you know they might be particularly good at communicating the interests of that ward in addition to you. It was very good. It was very worthwhile and process, and thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no further lights. I don't need that. I'd like to ask Alderman Wilson if he has a motion to make.
Thank you. Pursuant to 5 Illinois compiled statutes 120/2A, I move that the City Council convene into executive session to discuss agenda items regarding personnel, litigation, and minutes. These agenda items are permitted subjects to be considered in executive session and are enumerated exceptions under the Open Meetings Act. These exceptions are 5 ILCS 120/2C1, C11, and C21.
Thank you. Is there a second? City Clerk, could we have a roll call?
Alderman Nguyen. Aye. Alderman Wilson.
Aye.
Alderman Holmes.
Aye.
Alderman Tindem.
Aye.
Alderman Grover. Alderman Rainey. Alderman Burris. Alderman Fisk. Alderman Jean Baptiste.
Aye.
9-0.
9-0, the motion passes. Could we have a motion to adjourn?
Second.
Thank you. City Clerk?
Alderman Wilson. I'm sorry, Alderman Nguyen. Alderman Wilson.
Aye.
Alderman Holmes.
Aye.
Alderman Tindem. Alderman Grover. Alderman Rainey. Alderman Burris. Alderman Fisk. Alderman Jean Baptiste.
Aye.
9-0.
What is this? Marty? There was a packet, there was the rules, just the rules, no content, no substance. Marty,